Cory Booker insults. John Kennedy on live TV. John's next speech makes Booker collapse in regret. The morning sun filtered through the towering glass windows of the National News Network studio in Washington, D.C., casting a soft glow on the polished set where the nation's most watched political panel show American Pulse was about to go live. The air buzzed with anticipation, a palpable hum of excitement from the crew adjusting cameras and the audience settling into their seats. At the center of the sleek, circular desk sat Senator Cory Booker, his tailored Navy suit crisp, his smile confident, exuding the charisma that had made him a rising star in American politics. Across from him, the host, Rachel Morgan, a seasoned journalist known for her sharp questions, shuffled her notes, her eyes darting to the countdown clock. The studio lights flared, the theme music swelled, and with a nod from the director, the broadcast began beaming into millions of homes across the country. "Good morning, America!" Rachel began, her voice steady and commanding. "Today, we're diving into the latest political firestorm shaking Washington." Joining us is Senator Cory Booker, a vocal advocate for justice and reform. "Senator, welcome." Booker nodded, his grin widening as he leaned forward, ready to seize the moment. The audience clapped politely, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something big was about to unfold. Rachel wasted no time. "Senator Booker, let's get straight to it," she said, her tone probing. "There's been a lot of chatter about a recent move by Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana to push for an investigation into federal funding for community development projects. Some say it's a bold stand against waste. Others call it a political stunt. What's your take?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, the studio was silent, every eye on Booker. He chuckled, a low, deliberate sound that carried a hint of disdain. Then, with a smirk curling the corner of his mouth, he leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with confidence. "Rachel, let me be clear," he said, pausing for effect. "John Kennedy is a man playing a role he's not fit for. He's out there waving his investigation like it's some grand crusade. But let's call it what it is, a distraction. The man lacks integrity, plain and simple. He's not serving the people of Louisiana or this country. He's serving himself, and it's a disgrace." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the audience, a few hands flying to mouths in shock. Rachel's eyes widened, her pen frozen mid-air. The control room, visible through a glass partition, erupted into frantic whispers as producers scrambled to gauge the fallout. Booker, unfazed, leaned back in his chair, his smirk growing. "I said what I said," he added, his tone defiant. "The American people deserve leaders who stand for truth, not politicians hiding behind empty gestures." The studio was a pressure cooker, now the air thick with the weight of Booker's words. Rachel, regaining her composure, tried to steer the conversation. "That's a strong statement, Senator," she said, her voice measured. "Are you suggesting Senator Kennedy's investigation is baseless?" Booker didn't hesitate. "I'm saying it's a sham," he replied, his eyes glinting with conviction. "Kennedy's out there pointing fingers, but he's got no substance to back it up. The people of this country aren't fooled by his folksy act. They see through it, and they're tired of leaders who think they can coast on charm while doing nothing for the communities that need it most." The audience was divided. Some clapped in support, others murmured in disapproval, their whispers a low hum beneath the studio lights. On the monitors, social media feeds exploded. Clips of Booker's tirade were already circulating, racking up thousands of shares within minutes. Hashtags like #Booker calls out Kennedy and "No integrity" trended on X with users posting fiery takes. Finally, someone said it. One user wrote, "Kennedy's a fraud," but others pushed back Booker's out of line. Kennedy's fighting for us. The internet was a battlefield, and the war had just begun. Back in the studio, the segment wrapped abruptly, Rachel cutting to a commercial break with a strained smile. As the cameras panned away, Booker's team gathered backstage exchanged triumphant glances. His chief of staff, Marcus, a wiry man with a knack for spin, clapped Booker on the shoulder as he stepped off the set. "That was bold, Cory." Marcus said, his voice low but excited. "You just set the narrative. Kennedy's on the ropes now." Booker nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, his confidence unshaken. "It needed to be said," he replied, adjusting his tie. "Kennedy's been dodging accountability for too long. Let's see how he handles this." The team huddled already, planning their next move, press releases, follow-up interviews, maybe even a viral campaign to amplify Booker's words. They were riding high, convinced they'd landed a knockout blow in the court of public opinion. But as they strategized, something nagged at Marcus. He glanced at his phone, scrolling through X, and noticed a shift. The comment sections weren't as supportive as he'd expected. Arrogant, one user wrote. "Booker's just grandstanding," said another. Marcus frowned but brushed it off. "It's just noise," he muttered, pocketing his phone. "We've got this." Across town, in a modest office on Capitol Hill, Senator John Kennedy sat at his desk, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of a television replaying Booker's interview. Kennedy, known for his sharp wit and unassuming demeanor, watched the clip in silence, his expression unreadable. His aide Sarah, a young woman with a fierce loyalty to her boss, stood nearby, her arms crossed. "He went too far." "Senator," she said, her voice tight with anger, "calling you a disgrace on live TV? That's low even for Booker." Kennedy took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "Let him talk," he said finally, his Louisiana drawl soft but steady. "Folks who throw stones usually got something to hide." Sarah hesitated, then pressed, "Are we responding?" "The media's already blowing this up. People are waiting to hear from you." Kennedy set his cup down, leaning back in his chair. "We'll respond," he said, a faint glint in his eye. "But not with noise, with truth." He reached for a folder on his desk, its edges worn, but its contents meticulously organized. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She'd seen that folder before, months of research emails, financial records, all tied to questionable community projects Booker had championed. "You're going there?" she asked, almost a whisper. Kennedy nodded. "The people deserve to know who's really fighting for 'em." As the day wore on, the fallout from Booker's words grew. News channels replayed the clip on loop, pundits dissecting every syllable. On talk radio, callers were split. Some praised Booker's boldness, others called it a cheap shot. In a small diner in Shreveport, Louisiana, a group of regulars gathered around a TV mounted in the corner, the volume turned up. "Booker's got nerve," said one man, a retired mechanic named Earl, shaking his head. "Kennedy's been out here working for us, and this guy's just slinging mud." A waitress wiping down the counter chimed in. "I don't know, Earl. Booker's got a point. Maybe Kennedy's investigation is just politics." The debate spilled onto the streets, into coffee shops and living rooms, as Americans grappled with the clash. But beneath the noise, something was stirring, a groundswell of unease about Booker's motives. On X, a user with a modest following posted a question that began to gain traction. If Kennedy's such a fraud, why's Booker so mad about an investigation? What's he hiding? The post was shared thousands of times. planting seeds of doubt. In Newark, New Jersey, Booker's campaign headquarters was a hive of activity. Staffers fielded calls from reporters, drafted statements, and monitored the online frenzy. But Marcus, pacing the office, couldn't shake his growing unease. The X comments were turning uglier, and not just from Kennedy's supporters. Even some of Booker's base seemed hesitant, their usual enthusiasm muted. "We need to double down," Marcus told the team, rallying them. "Push the narrative that Kennedy's investigation is a distraction from real issues. Cory's the voice of the people here." The staff nodded, diving back into their tasks, but one person lingered in the corner, her expression troubled. Lynn, a former intern who'd risen to a junior staffer role, clutched a stack of files, her knuckles white. She'd worked on Booker's community projects, typing up reports, cross-referencing budgets. She'd seen things, discrepancies, vague contracts, names that didn't add up. At the time, she'd dismissed them as clerical errors. But now, with Booker's attack on Kennedy, those memories gnawed at her. "You okay, Lynn?" a colleague asked, noticing her hesitation. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a lot going on," but inside her stomach churned. What if Kennedy's investigation wasn't a stunt? What if he was on to something? By late afternoon, the National News Network announced a surprise development. Senator John Kennedy would deliver a live address that evening, a rare move for the typically low-key senator. The news sent shockwaves through political circles. Pundits speculated wildly, would Kennedy fire back with insults, deflect or ignore Booker altogether? Booker's team gathered around a conference table, watching the announcement on a laptop. Marcus tried to project confidence. "He's scrambling," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Kennedy's not built for this kind of fight. Cory's got him cornered." But Booker, seated at the head of the table, was quieter than usual, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "What's he going to say?" he asked, almost to himself. Marcus shrugged. "Probably some folksy nonsense to charm his base. Nothing we can't handle." But the room felt heavy, the earlier bravado fading. Lynn, standing by the door, slipped out unnoticed, her heart racing. She pulled out her phone, staring at a contact she hadn't called in months, a reporter she'd met during a press event. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she hesitated, tucking the phone away. Not yet, she thought. But the seed of doubt had taken root. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the nation turned its attention to the upcoming address. In homes across Louisiana, families gathered around their TVs, a sense of pride mingling with curiosity. "Kennedy's one of us," said a woman in Baton Rouge, setting out snacks for her kids. "He don't play these games. If he's talking, it's for a reason." In a bar in New Orleans, patrons clinked glasses, betting on whether Kennedy would give Booker what's coming. The anticipation wasn't just in Louisiana. Viewers from California to Maine tuned in, drawn by the drama of the day's events. Back in the studio, Rachel Morgan prepared to anchor the coverage, her team scrambling to secure analysts for the post-speech breakdown. "This is big," she told her producer, adjusting her earpiece. "Kennedy doesn't do this often. Whatever he says, it's going to move the needle." The producer nodded, glancing at the clock. "Let's hope it's not just hot air." In his Capitol Hill office, Kennedy stood before a mirror, straightening his tie. The folder lay on his desk, its contents a ticking time bomb. Sarah handed him a glass of water, her voice steady but urgent. "You've got this, Senator. The people are with you." Kennedy gave her a small smile, the kind that carried years of experience in navigating political storms. "It ain't about me, Sarah," he said. "It's about them, the folks working 2 jobs, the kids who need a future. They're the ones Booker's insulting when he plays these games." He picked up the folder, its weight, a reminder of the responsibility he carried. As he walked toward the press room, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, each step echoing with purpose. The door loomed ahead, and beyond it a nation waiting. Booker had thrown the first punch, but Kennedy was ready to answer not with anger, but with something far more powerful. The truth was coming, and it would shake Cory Booker to his core. The evening sky over Washington, D.C. glowed a deep amber as the national news network's press room filled with a restless hum. Reporters jostled for position, their notebooks open, cameras rolling, and a tense anticipation crackling in the air. The announcement of Senator John Kennedy's live address had sent shockwaves through the Capitol, and now, with the clock ticking toward the broadcast, every major network was poised to capture what promised to be a pivotal moment. Inside the press room, the lights were harsh, illuminating a simple podium adorned with a single microphone and the seal of the United States Senate. The crowd hushed as the door opened, and Senator John Kennedy stepped forward. His stride measured his face, calm but resolute. He wore a plain gray suit, his tie a muted blue, a stark contrast to the polished flair of his opponent Cory Booker. In his hand, he held a thick folder, its edges worn, but its presence commanding. Kennedy approached the podium, set the folder down with deliberate care, and adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he stood silent, his gaze sweeping the room, locking eyes with a few reporters as if to say, "This is for you and for the people watching at home." Then, with a voice steady and laced with his signature Louisiana drawl, he began, "Good evening, folks," he said, his tone warm but firm. "I wasn't planning to stand here tonight. I'm a man who believes in doing the work, not making noise. But when someone stands on national television and calls me a disgrace, I owe it to the people of Louisiana and to every American to set the record straight." The room was silent, every word landing with weight. Kennedy's eyes flicked to the folder, and he tapped it lightly with his fingers. "This," he continued, "is the truth Senator Booker didn't want you to see. These are records, emails, contracts, financial transfers tied to community development projects Booker's been championing for years. Projects he's called a lifeline for the poor. But here's the rub. Millions of dollars meant for those communities never made it there. Instead, they ended up in the hands of shell companies run by folks who just happened to be major donors to Senator Booker's campaigns." A murmur rippled through the press corps pens, scratching furiously. Kennedy opened the folder, pulling out a single sheet and holding it up. This email, dated 3 years ago, shows a Booker staffer approving a $4.2 million grant to a nonprofit that doesn't exist. No office, no staff, just a P.O. box and a bank account tied to one of his oldest fundraisers. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the document's stark details. Kennedy's voice didn't rise, didn't waver. It carried the quiet authority of a man who knew the facts were enough. "I'm not here to sling mud," he said, setting the paper down. "I'm here because the people of this country deserve better than leaders who hide behind pretty words while pocketing their trust." Across the nation, living rooms and bars flickered, with the broadcast viewers leaning closer to their screens. In a small apartment in Baton Rouge, a single mother named Clara sat on her couch, her 2 kids asleep in the next room. She'd been skeptical of Kennedy's investigation, but now, watching him lay out the evidence, her heart sank. "That money was supposed to help us," she whispered, thinking of the crumbling community center in her neighborhood, promised funding that never arrived. She grabbed her phone, recording a shaky video. "Senator Kennedy, thank you for showing us the truth," she said, her voice breaking. "We're tired of being lied to." She posted it to X, and within minutes it began to spread, shared by thousands who felt the same betrayal. In diners, in offices, in homes from coast to coast, Americans watched as Kennedy methodically dismantled Booker's narrative, not with insults, but with facts. He read another document, this one, a contract funneling $1. $8 million to a consulting firm owned by a college friend of Booker's. A firm with no record of delivering services. This isn't about politics, Kennedy said, his eyes piercing the camera. This is about right and wrong. And when you take money meant for kids, for schools, for families, and call it justice, that's wrong. Back in Newark, Cory Booker's campaign headquarters was a scene of chaos. Staffers crowded around a television, their faces pale as Kennedy's speech unfolded. Marcus Booker's chief of staff stood frozen, his phone buzzing with notifications he didn't dare check. "He's got nothing," Marcus muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Booker sat at the head of the room, his hands clasped tightly, his jaw set. He hadn't spoken since the broadcast began, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. How did he get those documents? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Marcus shook his head. "It's probably bluff. We can spin this." But the room felt like it was closing in the air, heavy with the weight of Kennedy's revelations. Outside the office, Lynn, the junior staffer, stood in the hallway, her heart pounding. She'd known about those projects, had seen the red flags, budgets that didn't add up, payments to names she couldn't trace. She'd buried her doubts, loyal to Booker's vision. But now, with Kennedy laying it all bare, guilt churned in her chest. She slipped into a stairwell, pulling out her phone. This time she didn't hesitate. She dialed the reporter she'd considered calling earlier, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I have files," she said. "They back up what Kennedy's saying. I can't stay quiet anymore." The reporter, sensing a bombshell, promised anonymity and a meeting. Lynn hung up her hands, shaking, but a strange calm settled over her. She was done hiding. Kennedy's speech continued, each point more damning than the last. He shared a timeline of grants approved by Booker's office, cross-referenced with campaign donations from the same recipients. The numbers were staggering: $12 million over 5 years siphoned away from communities in need. Yet Kennedy's tone remained measured, almost mournful. "I don't take joy in this," he said, closing the folder. "But when someone calls me a disgrace for asking questions, I have to wonder, what are they so afraid of? The truth don't need to hide, folks. It just needs a chance to be heard." He stepped back from the podium, pausing to address the cameras directly. "To the people watching, I say this: demand better. Demand leaders who fight for you, not for their own pockets. That's what I'm doing, and I won't stop." The room erupted in questions, reporters shouting, but Kennedy raised a hand, signaling he was done. He walked off, leaving the folder on the podium, a silent challenge to anyone who dared dispute the evidence. The broadcast cut to Rachel Morgan in the studio, her face a mix of shock and professionalism. "That was extraordinary," she said, turning to her panel of analysts. "Senator Kennedy just dropped a bombshell on Senator Booker. Let's break this down." But the analysts barely had time to speak before social media took over. Clara's video from Baton Rouge went viral, joined by others: truck drivers, teachers, small business owners, all echoing her sentiment. "Kennedy's fighting for us," one man posted from a construction site in New Orleans. "Booker's been lying to our faces." The hashtag Truth Matters surged, drowning out the earlier pro-Booker trends. In a veterans' hall in Shreveport, a group of retirees watched the speech on a projector, their applause echoing through the room. "That's our senator one," said, wiping his eyes. "He don't back down." The tide was turning, and it was swift. In Newark, Booker's team scrambled to respond. Marcus called an emergency meeting, barking orders to draft a statement denying Kennedy's claims. "We'll say the documents are fabricated," he said, pacing. "We'll demand an investigation into how Kennedy got them. But the staff was rattled, their confidence shattered. Booker, still seated, finally spoke, his voice low. "What if he's right?" The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Marcus stopped pacing. "Cory, don't go there. We can fight this." But Booker's gaze drifted to the TV where a replay of Kennedy's speech showed the senator holding up that damning email. Memories flashed through Booker's mind, late-night meetings, vague assurances from donors' projects he'd signed off on without digging deeper. He'd trusted his team believed in the mission. But now, doubt crept in. Had he been played, or worse, had he let himself ignore the truth? As the night wore on, the fallout intensified. News outlets began verifying Kennedy's documents, independent analysts confirming their authenticity. A breaking report from a major paper cited an anonymous source, Lynn, though her name wasn't mentioned, corroborating the senator's claims. Booker's allies in the Senate grew quiet, their phones going to voicemail. In a quiet moment, Booker stepped outside, the cool air hitting his face. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother, a woman whose pride in him had always been unwavering. "Cory, call me," it read. "I saw the speech. We need to talk." He stared at the message, his throat tightening. The weight of the day pressed down on him, and for the first time he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Kennedy hadn't just responded, he'd changed the game. And as America watched, the truth was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, and it was coming for Cory Booker. The dim glow of a single lamp illuminated Cory Booker's hotel room in Newark, casting long shadows across the walls. It was well past midnight, and the city outside was quiet. But inside, Booker was restless, slouched on a couch, his tie loosened, his face etched with exhaustion. The television, muted, replayed snippets of Senator John Kennedy's devastating speech, each frame a reminder of the storm that had engulfed him. His phone lay on the coffee table, its screen cluttered with notifications, missed calls from staff, terse messages from allies, and one that cut deeper than the rest, an email from a 12-year-old boy named Jamal, a fan who'd once written to Booker about his dreams of becoming a senator. "I looked up to you," the email read, "but after what you said about Senator Kennedy, I don't anymore. You hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Booker stared at the words, his chest tightening. He'd faced criticism before, but this was different. Raw, personal, a child's disappointment that stripped away his defenses. He stood pacing the room, his reflection flickering in the dark window. The weight of his actions pressed down not just the public fallout, but the private toll. His mother's text from earlier still lingered. "Cory, I don't recognize you right now." Those words from the woman who'd raised him to value truth were a wound that wouldn't close. Across town in a modest Newark diner, a group of regulars gathered around a small TV, watching a late-night news segment, analyzing Kennedy's evidence. The mood was somber, the usual banter replaced by hushed conversations. A retired teacher named Evelyn, who had campaigned for Booker years ago, shook her head. "I believed in him," she said, stirring her coffee. "But Kennedy's right. Those projects Cory bragged about our neighborhood never saw a dime." Her friend, a bus driver, nodded. "It's not just the money. It's the lying." Kennedy didn't yell or curse. He just showed us the truth. The sentiment echoed across the country from rural Louisiana to urban California as Americans grappled with the betrayal. On X, the hashtag Truth Matters still trended, but now it was joined by Booker Apologize, fueled by posts from former supporters demanding accountability. One video, shared thousands of times, showed a Louisiana librarian holding up a photo of a boarded-up community center. "This is what Booker's progress looks like," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you, Senator Kennedy, for giving us a voice." Booker's campaign headquarters, once a hub of energy, was now a ghost town. Most staffers had left for the night, unwilling to face the media frenzy outside. Marcus, the chief of staff, sat alone in a conference room drafting a statement that felt hollow, even as he typed. "We'll call it a misunderstanding," he muttered, but the words rang false. He glanced at a photo on the wall. Booker at a rally, smiling, arms raised. That man seemed like a stranger now. Upstairs, Lynn, the junior staffer who'd leaked documents to the press, packed her desk, her hands trembling, but her resolve firm. She'd met the reporter that evening, handing over files that confirmed Kennedy's claims, emails, budgets, proof of misdirected funds. The story was breaking wide open, and Lynn, though terrified, felt a weight lift. "I did it for the people those projects were supposed to help," she told herself, slipping out into the night. Her actions, anonymous for now, were a spark that would soon ignite a reckoning. The next morning, Booker woke to a flood of headlines. Booker's projects under scrutiny. Kennedy's evidence verified, Senate allies distance themselves. His phone buzzed with a call from a senior senator, one of his closest mentors. "Cory," the voice said, heavy with regret. "You need to address this. Step up or step aside." The call ended abruptly, leaving Booker staring at the ceiling. He thought of Jamal's email, his mother's words, the faces of constituents he had let down. For the first time in years, he felt not the fire of ambition, but the sting of shame. He sat at a small desk, pulling out a sheet of hotel stationery, and began to write. The words came slowly, each one a struggle. "I was wrong. I let pride cloud my judgment. I hurt a good man, and betrayed the trust of those I swore to serve." He wrote until the page was full, then folded it, his hands steady for the first time in days. He called Marcus, his voice quiet but firm. "Set up a press conference. No spin. Just me." At noon, the National News Network studio was packed once more, but the atmosphere was different, less electric, more somber. Booker stepped onto the set, no tie, no smile, just a man stripped bare. The cameras rolled, and he looked directly into the lens, his voice soft but clear. "I owe an apology," he began, "to Senator John Kennedy, to my constituents, and to every American who believed in me. I called a man a disgrace when the disgrace was mine. I signed off on projects I didn't fully understand, trusting others when I should have asked questions. I let ambition blind me, and for that, I am deeply sorry." The studio was silent. The crew frozen, Rachel Morgan's eyes wide with surprise. Booker continued, his voice cracking as he addressed his mother. "Mom, you taught me to stand for truth. I failed you, but I'm trying to make it right." He announced his resignation from the Senate, effective immediately, and placed his campaign pin on the podium, a final gesture of surrender. "This isn't about politics," he said. "It's about accountability. I hope my mistake reminds us all to demand better." He walked off, head bowed, as the broadcast cut to a stunned Rachel. "That was unprecedented," she said, her voice trailing off. The nation watched, some in shock, others in tears. In a Louisiana church, a congregation gathered for a midday service, paused to pray, not for victory, but for healing. Booker did right in the end, the pastor said, his voice gentle. And Kennedy showed us how to stand tall without tearing others down. The prayer circle grew, hands clasped across generations, a quiet testament to the power of truth. On X, reactions poured in, not with vitriol, but with reflection. Booker's apology took guts, one user wrote. Kennedy didn't destroy him, he gave him a chance to grow. Another post from a teacher in Newark read, "Today I'll tell my students that even leaders fall, but they can rise by owning their mistakes. The narrative was shifting not toward division, but toward redemption. That afternoon, in a small, unannounced visit, Kennedy arrived at a Newark community center, one of the few still standing despite the misspent funds. He carried no cameras, no entourage, just a letter from Jamal, the boy who'd written to Booker. Kennedy met with Booker's mother, a woman whose strength mirrored her son's potential. "Mrs. Booker," he said, handing her the letter, "your son's apology mattered. This is from a boy who still believes in him. Tell Cory to keep going." She clutched the letter, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing the good in him." Kennedy nodded, his voice soft. "We all stumble. It's what we do next that counts." A passerby snapped a photo of the moment, posting it online with the caption, "This is leadership lifting others up, even after a fight." The image went viral, a beacon of hope in a fractured time. Days later, Kennedy hosted a quiet ceremony in Louisiana, inviting Lynn, now publicly known as the whistleblower, and Jamal, whose letter had touched so many. Under a sprawling oak tree, he spoke to a small crowd, his voice carrying over the hum of cicadas. "Truth isn't loud," he said, pinning a small badge on Jamal's shirt, engraved with courage. "It's steady like the folks here today." Lynn risked everything to speak up. "Jamal reminded us why we fight. They're the heart of this country." Lynn, tears streaming, hugged Kennedy, whispering, "I just wanted to do right." The crowd applauded, not with frenzy, but with reverence. Back in Newark, Booker watched the live stream alone, a faint smile breaking through his pain. He picked up a pen, starting a new letter. This one to Jamal. "You showed me what courage looks like. I'll spend my life earning your trust again." The lesson was clear, woven through every moment of the saga. Pride can blind, but truth illuminates. For the young and old, the powerful and the overlooked, the story was a call to embrace accountability, to seek forgiveness, and to build a community rooted in honesty. As families gathered in homes, schools held assemblies, and churches prayed, America found not just a scandal, but a mirror one that reflected its flaws and its potential. The chapter closed with a nation not cheering a victor, but standing together ready to write a better story, one truth at a time.